Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits special edition video. I had promised I was going to do a second video based on a second tour that I took there in Fort Worth. The first one was just the one I posted the other day, the one having to do with the log cabin village. If you haven't had a chance, check out that video. It's a great showcasing, at least on the photos, with regards to living history, especially with log cabins that pretty much the way they were in the 1800s are as today. So you can walk into the past essentially while you're there. So please, I highly recommend it. Check that out. This one has to do with a tour that I saw. It's a little bit different. Well, kind of the same. Like, it also involved living history of sorts, but rather than a log cabin, it had to do with a very beautiful home. It's a home that to this day is still utilized for several purposes, in particular having to do with weddings and venues associated with festivities and events. So it's a very grand house, very beautiful home, 3 stories tall. It has to do with a home called the Thistle Hill Home, or sometimes it's called the Thistle Hill Museum. It depends, I guess, on the website that you're looking at, and you're looking at a picture of it here. Fantastic place, highly recommended. When you have a chance and you're there in Fort Worth, just take a little bit, in this case west, from the center of Fort Worth. Just go out there and you'll find this home nestled near a location actually by a very large hospital. Of course, that hospital was built years and years and years after the Thistle Hill home, but it seems to be the last remaining area there of the early 1900s from Fort Worth. So highly recommended. So what is the Thistle Hill home and why did I go there? Well, for starters, it's a home that used to belong to several families and then several organizations. It was just handed down over the years, and eventually it became the historic hallmark that it is today. So right now it is a historic landmark. It is protected. So no matter how much the development grows around it, which was kind of stark and unique again to see, because when you drive up there you see a whole bunch of modern buildings, modern stores, and then there's this thing just right stark in the middle of it. But no matter what happens, it will always be protected. And whenever you go there, you can go there specifically by tours. They have certain days and certain hours within each day, but as I mentioned earlier, it's primarily used for events. In fact, when I was there, and some of the pictures that you've probably seen, it showcases like a large venue outside with a large amount of chairs right on that luscious green landscape. It's because there was a wedding that was going to happen there. And so the next day, in fact, and the whole idea is, if you wanted to rent this place for a wedding, the guy that was giving me the tour, he was quoting some of the information, and it's pretty popular. I can see it too, because when you look at the pictures on the inside, you will absolutely see why this place continues to be a fantastic place for any couple to start their wedding. Now, why I picked this location has to do with its reported hauntings, and later on I'll focus on one specific incident that occurred that let me think, wow, maybe this place is haunted. I can't explain it away. No photographic proof. Instead, it was something I heard. So stay tuned. You're going to definitely want to hear this. For starters, I wanted to focus on this guy right here, Michael. He was the tour guide there for me at the Thistle Hill home. When I arrived there, I was actually the only one, because it was the last scheduled tour of that day on Friday, and even though I was the only one, he still absolutely went out of his way to ensure that I got the best tour possible. So big, huge kudos to Michael. He was fantastic when it came to his tour. It lasted about an hour, 15 minutes or so, and again, thank you so much, even though I was the only one for him, that he still took the time and the effort for that. So when you walk inside the home, you're greeted with some of the most beautiful interior I have ever seen. Much of the home is restored, actually. Here's the story behind it. So it was built sometime in the early 1900s, and again, it's gone through several families, but the very first time it was built for a lady named Electra Wagner. and her husband or future husband, a guy named A.B. Wharton Jr. So it was built because the idea was the father, William Wagner, was promising her, and I'm trying to remember the details correctly from the tour, so excuse me if maybe something is just slightly off, but it was built for her because if she promised to take care of some of the other family members, then he would have the home built for her and her future family, in this case her husband and maybe some future kids. And so that was the deal. She ended up doing it, and the home was built for her. She actually didn't live there that long. That was surprising to learn. She's the most famous resident of the entire history of the home, but she only lived there, I think, just about a decade or so. But in that time period, she was definitely the most popular, one of the most popular citizens there in Fort Worth. I guess you could call her the equivalent today of a socialite. She was absolutely very famous there in Fort Worth. She always held these really grand parties. Imagine like the Roaring Twenties type parties, and that's what it was here. And throughout the house, and the first floor in particular, there was a bunch of rooms involved. There was a room just for the men whenever they came over for business, because she held a lot of parties again, either for just social events, or whenever the city of Fort Worth, I get had business to attend to, she would invite them over, her and her husband, and they would hold those parties there. So there was a room just for them, just for the men to do their business, and then there was a room for the ladies to just gather around and hang out, I guess, with each other. There was another room, which you'll see later on, a larger room that was the actual dining room of sorts, and it was a gigantic table there, and that's where the food was held. That's on the second floor. And then somewhere towards the very top, I'm sorry, that was on the first floor, and then somewhere on the very top third floor, that's where they would have the actual festivities, because the whole top floor was built to ensure that dancing was done. That's where they would have the very, very old turntables playing, all essentially just a house used for those purposes. But even then, again, she just lived 10 years. She definitely left her mark because she renovated so much of that place. She was adding columns, she was fixing porches, she had stuff added onto the roof. It's essentially, it was a place for elegance, a place for lavishness. That's the way it was described to me. And eventually she moved. She sold the home to some other gentleman, a guy named Winfield Scott, and then that was it. That was the end of her life, at least with that home itself. The home later on with Winfield Scott, it seemed like he stayed there for a while as well, but he too kind of had like itchy fingers when it came to restoration or remodeling. Fascinating though. I mean, this was a home built from scratch just in the 1910s, and all during that time period up until two owners, they were all renovating it left and right. And in his case, he ended up dying before the renovation was finished, and eventually it was left to, I think, his wife and his son, and then the son kind of let it stand there, like it just pretty much went to squalor right by itself. So much so that cut to the 1940s or so, and then it went to another new owner. The home went to some organization, a nonprofit called the Girls Service League. They kind of took care of it, and they were probably actually the longest owners of the home, but this is where the home took a different turn. They took care of it, but they didn't have the money that the previous owners had when it came to all that restoration. All that restoration eventually made sure the home stayed beautiful and intact. But in this case, this organization did not have that kind of money to spend. They would apparently do repairs as much as they could, but they were almost like band-aid repairs. There was not much deep repairs that could be done. So the home, little by little, started to, I guess, go bad. Like it started to lose its glamour that it had before. Eventually, so much so that it was abandoned sometime in the 70s, and for a couple of years it was just left as is. In fact, one of these pictures that you'll see here, you'll see like a before and after picture. Inside, everything was just pretty much dilapidated. I mean, when you have a home that's completely abandoned, you can just imagine the weather, what it'll do to the inside, let alone the outside. So sometime in the late 70s, that's when there was another organization, something called Save the Scot. They decided they wanted to save this home because other homes around it, I think from the same era, were being demolished to make way for new buildings, new houses, whatever. In that case, this organization ended up saving it, and then eventually it passed to the current organization. I think it's called the History of Fort Worth, Historical Society of Fort Worth, something along those lines. They took it and they restored it using a whole bunch of donations to its former glory, to the days of its most famous owner, Electra Wagner. And that's it. That's the history of it to this very day. It was painstaking, too. Apparently, it took several years and lots of money to make sure that it's restored to its beautiful elegance, the one it had before. And all these pictures that you've been looking at showcase essentially how wonderful it looked on the inside. Now, as far as the ghost stories, this was actually kind of interesting because I did bring it up just once with Michael, just asking that I couldn't help but check online that there were some rumors about hauntings within this location. He was real nice about it, but it did seem like the place that he manages, the home there, like it's not something they really want to essentially, I guess, make it known for or only known for. Clearly they want to make sure that this place stays open for venue events, especially for bridal parties, for bridal showers, for bridal weddings, whatever along those lines. So whenever others have heard of the stories of the hauntings with the Thistle Hill home, that's not something they necessarily want to spread. But here's my experience, at least. Well, actually, let's talk about first, like what people have said or that I've experienced there. Apparently, if you go there, you may see the apparition of a young woman dressed in period clothing, let's say from the early 1900s, as you're walking there. And that's supposed to be, it's rumored to be actually Electra Wagner herself, that even though she was only there about 10 years, she still has never left. And so she sometimes visits people. Either she's happy with them, with what they're doing, or she's looking concerned, I guess, with what's going on with the home. Either way, she still has that attachment to it. There's also supposed to be another gentleman, unknown who he is or who he's rumored to be, but it's someone that's dressed in period tennis like a tennis dressings, whatever those are. I guess if you could imagine those fancy tennis clothing that some of the rich people wear, think of it like that. And he's supposed to be there, sometimes actually by the staircase that you've already seen pictures of as well. Also, people apparently hear voices within the home. They hear footsteps as well when nobody, of course, should be there. One of the most famous examples of someone seeing something happened to be with, there was a story I read online. There was a bridal event, another one, happening there at the home, and something was forgotten, I guess, in one of the floors, either the second floor or maybe the third, for the bride. And so one of the bridesmaids went back into the home, and as she was doing so, just through the corner of her eye, somewhere in another room, she saw that there was someone, like a young woman in period costume, walking around, but not looking at her or not noticing her. Instead, she was just walking around to the room and then leaving and turning a corner, I guess, out of sight. And that lady was thinking to herself, oh, okay, it's just somebody that happens to work here, maybe. And so when she started asking around, after she got that item that she went to retrieve, she started asking around, and then that's when I told her nobody's there. Nobody's in the home at that time. And then that's when she realized that that was the rumored apparition, except in this case, it was true enough, like it was real enough to make it seem like there was somebody there. Now, as far as my own experience, nothing in terms of visual experience. None of my pictures show anything in terms of an experience. No orbs, no lights, no shadows, no apparitions, nothing on those lines. But I think I did have something auditory happen. So let's focus on this picture right here specifically. It's a set of staircases. These staircases went up from the very bottom because the home actually has 4 floors in total. There's a basement, then there's the entrance floor, then there's a second, and then there's a very top quote unquote attic, although it's not really an attic. And then so that staircase leads up several floors. And when we were passing it, myself and Michael, we were in the hallway nearby examining some of the pictures and drawings of the home itself. And while we were there just talking, we're the only ones again within the entire home. Nobody has entered, nobody has exited. In fact, if you do happen to take the tour, the door is locked. The only door, the only entrance is locked at all times. Public door at least, and it's locked when you're going in, locked when you're going out, again to ensure that nobody is able to access the home without prior approval. Well, there we were near that staircase, that little mini staircase, and we were talking. It was quite quiet because again, there's no music, there's no sound, it's just us talking. And to the left of me by that mini staircase, I heard the sound of a footstep. Now, not like a footstep, like an actual footstep. Like imagine the sound a foot would make, let's say, as it's walking. No, nothing like that. Instead, the sound that I heard was the sound as if someone was stepping on one of those stairs, like one of those actual old wooden steps within this picture. Imagine that sound. Again, it's not a sound of a footstep, but it's the sound of the pressure of somebody stepping on that piece of wood. It definitely sounded like that to me. We both turned straight to that direction. Clearly nobody was there. Clearly nobody had been there. But that's what occurred. And then I believe Michael had mentioned something along those lines, though, that, it's an old house. Sometimes there's noises like that. But I can kind of tell the difference between like an old house creaking. Yeah, I know those sounds, and then this one sounded more intentional. Again, it sounded like a purposely placed step, so that definitely stood out for me with regards to that experience. Because another thing that people state is that they sometimes feel like within the home, like someone is watching them. I didn't feel that. I've never felt that. I have no idea how that feels, in fact. So if that ever happens to me, I'll let everyone know. But otherwise, that is as close as possible. So if something was there, based on again that purposeful sound, it definitely did sound like someone took a step right there on that staircase. Then who knows? I didn't see it, I didn't feel it, I didn't sense it, I didn't smell it, nothing along those lines, but that's the closest thing that I got to any paranormal experience. But that was it. Once the tour finished, it was just heading on back outside. I was able to take a couple more pictures of the beautiful scenery, the grass surrounding it, and then the sub home that's by the side of it that was used and lived by the servants there of the home during the decades. So that's it. That's my experience there at the Thistle Hill home, or the Thistle Hill Museum. Again, highly recommended. If you're there in Fort Worth, take a look at it. It is well worth it. I think the tour is $20 if I'm not mistaken, but it's fascinating. It's so worth it. You get to see a beautiful home from the early 1900s standing as is today. So great stuff. So all right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.